Today we are talking about the Beach Boys' Love You album, released in, I believe, in April of '77. So almost a year after 15 Big Ones, which was the album that I reviewed in my last album review. And this one might just be my favorite Beach Boys album of all time. It's gotta be in top 5 at least. This one is a controversial album. Not a lot of people, well, many people actually don't like it at all, but a lot of people actually love it. So it really divides people 50-50. And some people say that it takes a bit time to get into it, and with some people I guess that's true. With me it was very different. I loved it immediately because I just fell in love with the quality of the songwriting. The compositions are super strong, catchy, memorable. The production is very cool. It is so interesting, and I still haven't really heard anything like this one. Some tracks on the abandoned Adult Child album are very similar to the Love You material, but even after that, Brian never really came back to this style, which is a shame because it rocks. But anyway, let's just get into it. There's really not much of backstory because it follows really well the 15 Big Ones album, and really check that album out if you want to hear me talking about that backstory and history and the situation with the group. So, you know, this is just a natural follow-up to that. And this time Brian is doing completely originals, and there's that cool interview, I believe it's from '77, I think it's about half an hour long, with Brian just chatting very casually, and he's talking about also some tracks that ended up on MIU and also 15 Big Ones. So that whole period is sort of covered in that cool interview. You can find it on YouTube. He's smoking a cigarette and cracking jokes, and it's a really cool insight into this period. So anyway, this is the inner sleeve, and it's got a beautiful message from the group to Brian, and really nice picture of Brian and Marilyn. And the other side, there's black and white shots of their tour. Really nice stuff. Even Audrey is there, and Al looks like he's drunk. I don't know, probably wasn't, but he looks like he's drunk. Then he's holding him up. And Brian with his amazing robe. This is what I'm talking about. I talked about this in the previous video where it might not be the previous video on the channel, but one of the previous videos where I talked about the upcoming Funko Pops, that I'd love to have a Funko Pop with Brian and the classic robe. Rock god look, Brian. I love that one. Anyway, just a cool inner sleeve. The back cover of the album looks like this, and the design is by Dean Torrance, and this is the best thing by far that Dean Torrance designed for the group. I just love this. You gotta love this. And for me it reminds of Nintendo styled 8-bit, you know, stuff, even though it wasn't really a thing back then in '77, and apparently it's supposed to be a knitting map, but I always saw it as a sort of Nintendo thing, especially because the music really sounds like kind of like Nintendo stuff. And by the way, if you want to really dive deeply into the songs themselves, I highly recommend you to check out. I bet you can still find those from YouTube. There at least used to be 2 different versions. Some really cool people did Nintendo styled coverage, like the whole album. They turned the music into Nintendo styled music, and I actually think that's really genius, and that's a really great way to dive into the compositions and the melodies themselves, because you are not thinking about the lyrics while you're actually just listening to those simplified renditions of these tracks. So I highly recommend those. Just 5 minutes ago realized that there is actually a surfboard in this album cover. I think behind Brian over there is a guy holding a surfboard, which is pretty funny. But anyway, like, most of this is played by Brian and sung by Brian. The other Wilson brothers help a lot too, but Mike and Al are mostly absent, and Bruce is there, even though he wasn't part of the group at this point, but he's there making a really nice cameo appearance at the end of I Bet He's Nice, but it's mostly just Brian. And Dennis sings a lot too, which I love. And like I mentioned, most of the instruments too are played by Brian. Dennis plays some sort of more sophisticated drum parts on a few tracks, but mostly it's just Brian. And the drum sound overall on this album is amazing. It's so consistent and it sounds like a drum machine. Very powerful snare drums, and I love that sound. It almost sounds like a summer in paradise, sort of a gunshot sound. It's so powerful, but in a good way, like not in a bad way. So I love that sound. I don't know how Brian got that sound with the engineer Stephen Moffat and Mankey. I think they both were engineering this project. And there's Steve Desper is credited too because of A Good Time, which is a outtake from Sunflower, which was actually part of the Spring project too. But I think I'll just dive into the tracks themselves because there's a lot to discuss about 14 tracks. Once again, a long album. And one more thing about this album, it's really hard to find a copy without the cutout. So it's not an expensive album because it didn't sell well at all. And yeah, well, I gotta mention this one thing before we dive into the tracks too. Before the release of this one, their record label, Warner, knew that they had already signed to a new label, which was gonna be CBS, so they didn't promote this at all. So that's the main reason why this didn't sell. Some people say that it didn't sell because it's crap or whatever, but and uncommercial. But I don't really buy that because there is, well, maybe they didn't choose the best possible lead singles, but I believe that the main reason why it didn't sell, and that's really the main reason why anything sells or doesn't sell, is the fact that they did not promote it properly. And the only single really that they released from this one is Honkin' Down the Highway / Solar System, which Honkin' Down the Highway is a great single, but I think the ballads would have been more suitable for this, or even Roller Skating Child and Mona, so it's got single potential too. But anyway, it's a super solid album, and it's a shame that it didn't sell because it's a great one. It is truly a great one. But let's now dive into the tracks themselves. The album opens up extremely strongly with Let Us Go On This Way, which is a Brian Mike Love co-write. Most of the songs are written, both lyrics and music, by Brian on the album, but this is one of the songs where Mike collaborated with lyrics. And this track is about teenagers or a teenager in classroom or school setting. Lyrically, it's a pretty simple tune about just this guy in classroom, so it's about teenagers and that sort of thing. And you got to remember this when you listen to this album, because this album has other tunes as well, which are written from the perspective of a teenager in school. So it's not maybe so obvious in some of the later tracks, especially the next one, but you got to remind yourself when you're listening to this that it is not all introspective from Brian's perspective, but he's also writing songs about subjects that he used to write about 10 years or 15 years previously, sort of thinking about his childhood or younger years, college and high school and stuff like that. So anyway, Let Us Go On This Way is one of those tracks, and it's very obvious. Somebody might say ugly sounds that Brian is creating with the synth is really something else. It's very unique. Nobody was using synthesizers like that around this time period. Basically relying the whole recording on these synthesizers. So he's not just using the synthesizer as a bass element below everything else somewhere there hidden. He's actually pretty much just building the whole song on these sort of ugly sounding synthesizer sounds. And it's so unique, and Carl's vocal style on this one is growly and powerful. It almost sounds like punk, even though this album in general is something that I would consider synth pop, even though there really wasn't a genre named that when this was out, but it mostly sounds like synth pop, especially the tracks on the B side, side 2. But anyway, just a great opener, and it is followed with another rocker, Roller Skating Child, which once again is about teenagers roller skating in a rink and then making sweet love. You gotta remind yourself that it's about teenagers. Hugo, really, do you really have to do that once again? Oh, I don't know what it is about this dog. Every time I do a video, he starts to sabotage this. So I'm really sorry, but just hang on. Anyway, I love this tune. The lyrics are hilarious, and the melody, forget the lyrics, but the song itself rocks really hard. Check out the live version from around this time period too, and the way it's produced, I love the guitars on it, and once again the synths, and I love Brian's little part at the very end where he is shouting the title of the track. But anyway, it's just a really lovely groovy track, and I wish that more people would get past the lyrics and, stop thinking about the bearded men in this situation, because it's not about that. Even though I need to mention this because I know that some people are probably going to write it in the comment section. From around the release of this album, Brian gave a interview for a magazine, so there's this little interview thing with him where he is commenting on each song, and well, you can think whatever you want to think about that, but my take on that whole thing is that partially Brian is talking probably truthfully, and probably he got the inspiration for this track because he saw his kids in an ice skating rink and he started to think about that setting, and then he was, on the mood of like the title track, thinking about his younger days, and so the ice skating was kind of a fad around this time period, so he thought that he maybe could do another hit like that, like he did with surfing and stuff, with that in mind to please the sort of the younger fans. So that's at least my take on it. He's not actually thinking about doing these things that he's singing about in the song with his kids, which is the thing that some people think that it is about, but it's not about that. And then there's also a few other really interesting quotes from that little paper interview. So anyway, just my thought about that newspaper article is that it's a funny thing to read, but you should not use that as a sort of canonized gospel of how to read these lyrics, because that's just not the way poetry works. It doesn't matter if the writer said something funny in a newspaper interview. I think that's a really funny read, but you shouldn't really use that as a sort of map to read these lyrics. That's just my take on it. Anyway, let's move on. Mona is once again another sort of rocking tune. It has a very cool sort of 50s styled chord pattern. It's very simple. I think it only has like 3 or 4 chords, and it just repeats that one verse basically, and then he sings the lead. And for some reason this song really reminds me of Bruce Springsteen, sort of something that could have been on River album with a very different production, but it has that sort of vibe, that very casual, vibe. I don't know how to really describe it, but it's just about this guy who's, just a normal guy, and he tries to impress this woman and thinks about these things that he'd like to do with this woman, like, showing some Phil Spector records to her and stuff like that. So, it's a very Brian thing. Dennis singing this is genius because his voice is so soothing and the melody is very pleasing. And while this is probably the second to most simple song on the whole album, I still love it. It's very, like I said, it's just very pleasing and soothing, and it works really well at the beginning of this album. And it really paints this album as a sort of very today-esque, because the side 1 is filled with rockers and side 2 is filled with ballads. So it's got a very similar style in that area. Johnny Carson, which is a Brian Wilson solo composition and lyrics and all, and it's just about Johnny Carson. The music is really cool, but to be honest, this is probably my least favorite track on the album, excluding maybe Good Time. I still love it. I still think it's really funny, But the thing is, I've never seen a single episode of Johnny Carson. The music is alright, but to me it's one of the more weaker tracks on the album. Because it's not really a rocker, but it's not a ballad, so there's just not an emotion that I can really get behind into. But it's still a funny track, and that legendary crash hit, that single crash is just hilarious. It's my favorite part of the whole song. At a random part, there's just this cymbal crash, and it's like, what? Why is that there? I don't know. It's so manic. Anyway, it's a funny tune, but maybe one of my least favorites. Then that's followed with Good Time, which is the Sunflower outtake, and it's an alright tune, and I don't mind it that it's included over here. Some people say that it doesn't really belong to Love You, that it's so, the way Brian sings it and that whole production is so different. Well, I can actually, out of all the Sunflower outtakes, I think this fits Love You the most. Well, I would maybe prefer this album being without it, because the other songs that Brian wrote, the new songs, are, I think, much stronger than Good Time. But I think it's still nice to have Good Time here. It's a fun song, and I don't mind the fact that Brian's voice is a bit more youthful. And the production on it is not really that different. I think it flows really well, because Johnny Carson is, well, it does have those sort of quirky synthesizer things too, but it's a bit more conventional from the production standpoint. So Good Time following that works really well, and then Good Time is followed with Honkin' Down the Highway, which once again is a bit more conventional when it comes to the arrangement and the production. So Honkin' Down the Highway, Al sings the lead on it, and it's a fun tune. It's a rocker. I love Dennis's. I think Dennis played the drums on this one, because it's got this hard drum beat. Sounds very much like Dennis. And like I mentioned, the country-esque guitar licks, which go like they are throughout the track. I love those, and I think this could have been a hit. I don't know why it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't promoted enough. But I think Al's lead vocals are super solid. I think the lyrics are fine. Melody is cool. Not my favorite on the album, once again, because I prefer side 2 and the ballads, but it is a very nice song nonetheless. It's nothing too deep. It's just about a guy going to see a movie with a girl, and that's really it, and he's stuck in a traffic somewhere. So it's a pretty simple song. And then side 1 ends off with Ding Dang, which was Brian Wilson, Roger McQueen from the Byrds composition. I guess Roger wrote the lyrics for that one verse. And well, this is a classic tune. Brian's done multiple versions of it. There's the Rolling Up to Heaven, there's Clanging, Brian's tune, Short Nimbred, and I love it. I think it's an amazing album, like side closer, and I love it how it fades in and fades out. Though I'm really hoping maybe in a year or two, if we get a box set of this era, that we'd get a longer version of it, because there's no way that this recording session, this particular track, was just 55 seconds long or whatever, 57 seconds long. There's just no way. I'm pretty sure it's gotta be longer. So I would love to hear the full take, because the jam is just amazing. I love it, and that's not even like ironically. I really actually love it. I always loved it. Always thought it's really hard rocking and catchy, and it is simple, you know, but it sounds simpler than what it actually is, because the arrangement is actually kind of hard. Those elements just change super fastly, and that rhythm, there's like these rhythmic changes, I don't really know what you call them, so it's not actually easy song to sing along to in that sense. But you know, it would be very boring if it would just repeat the exact same stuff. So anyway, but I love it. It's got a very nice backing track, and you know, it's not a deep song. There's nothing really else to talk about it. Then we will get to the good stuff, which side 2 is filled with. And side 2 starts off with Solar System, which is about solar system, and it's a waltz. Really cool composition. Just the way Brian sings it so effortlessly, and with the lyrics too, he makes it sound like a nursery rhyme or something, which is it's not. It's actually very hard song, very complicated composition, which is so cool. But Brian sings it very beautifully. I love his vocals on it, and I think Solar System is just a great way to start off side 2 because it's a bit more lightweight. Because then it's followed with The Night Was So Young, which is sung by Carl so beautifully. And this one is a bit more on the conventional side too, because there's a very prominent guitar, sort of like this today-esque post-surf rock guitar going, this sort of lick going on in it, which I believe Carl actually plays too. But The Night Was So Young is one of the, not only one of the best songs on this album, but one of the best songs that Brian ever wrote. And it's very touching, and this really goes into this sort of Pet Sounds category for me with the subject matter, and the lyrics are very poetic and beautiful, and you know, just the composition and everything about it, it could easily fit with a little bit different production, it could easily fit on Pet Sounds. So in my opinion, it's just as great as anything on it. But I like even more I Bet He's Nice, which is the song that follows The Night Was So Young. It's once again, it's a very similar subject matter. It's about this guy that was in love with a woman who then left him and then is with another man. So he's sort of like wondering, you know, that situation, just alone in a room and, you know, being sad and very desperate. Very common theme in a lot of Beach Boys tracks, this melancholic feeling with being alone. And what I love most about this track is once again the backing track, phenomenal. It sounds very modern, and the usage of synthesizers with those percussive, what's that instrument that is played on it? Well, that very percussive sound anyway. Amazing, just amazing stuff. And then the way the brothers sing together with Bruce at the tag, that it's got this classic Bruce tag, which is just the best thing ever. Like, Bruce is the tag man. I don't know what it is about him, but Brian called him just for this, which is pretty amazing. But you know, Carl sings on it, Dennis sings on it, and Brian sings on it, and there's really no other tune where they would swap the lead vocals and sing like that, only the three of them together, which makes the song very unique and important. And I wish that they'd done more songs in this style, which is weird that they didn't, because, you know, they were brothers and singing all the time together. But most of the time it was all, you know, some of them, like one of those guys was singing the lead, and that was it, and the others were in the back. So I love about this the fact that they are singing together, leads and also background vocals. But there's just something about these lyrics that I really love. Some of the best lyrics that Brian ever wrote, in my opinion. And there's just something really soothing and warming in Dennis's voice especially. He sings so beautifully throughout this album. Let's Put Our Hearts Together is then a sort of duet with Brian and his wife Marilyn. But it wasn't actually written as a duet. Brian just decided to record it that way, because he was struggling with the part that Marilyn was then eventually sang. So it's not a long song, just a bit over 2-minute song, but it's really nice. Once again, really cool composition, really nice lyrics, and it's very bittersweet because their marriage wasn't doing very well at this point. So it's very sort of bittersweet that and really nice for Marilyn to still, you know, come and sing on this song. And I think she sings really beautifully. And I love that one part where she sings the word good, and there's like 15 notes on that word. It's crazy. Not an easy task to sing that melody, but anyway, really nice song, really beautiful. The fifth track on side 2 is I Wanna Pick You Up, and this track is, when it comes to the backing track, it's one of the most interesting ones in my opinion, because it's got really nice, once again, really nice usage of those synthesizer sounds. And Dennis's vocals are phenomenal, and also Brian's got a part in this track where he sings just like his Sunflower self. it's really weird when you think about it. He was really able to do that sort of youthful sound too around this time period. Obviously he had matured, his voice had matured a little bit, and probably the drugs and stuff, smoking, had probably done some damage to his voice, but it wasn't completely gone. The way he sings on this album and 15 Big Ones, the lead vocals mostly, is sort of a put on, because when we get to the next album, MIU, we can hear that he still sings beautifully. So it's just a very interesting period, because then there's these glimpses like in the backing vocals, and then I Want to Pick You Up, where he sings so clear and beautifully with power and just like his youthful self. So it's just interesting. But anyway, like lyrically, yeah, I gotta mention this. It's about a baby, and well, not actually a baby, but the thing is, in my opinion, it's about Brian's kids, and they weren't babies anymore at this time. But Brian was sort of thinking about how he wishes that they were still babies, because he wasn't there to do those daily tasks when they were babies. He was doing other stuff, and this was around the time when he wrote this song, when he was getting back to life. Landy helped him a lot, and he got therapy, and he got rid of drugs for a moment there and started to exercise, and he started to sort of wish that his kids were still babies, so he could sort of go through with that phase, because he didn't experience that when that time was. So at least in my opinion, that's what the song is about, and it's very bittersweet and sad in that sense. Anyway, let's move on. The sixth song on the album is Airplane, one of the highlights of the album, and this is a really nice song, by the way, to listen to while you are in an airplane. Try it out, it works really well. One of Mike's greatest lead vocals, and it's one of the rare Mike lead vocals on the album anyway, and the first Mike lead vocal on this side. And once again, lyrically a very simple tune, but the composition is really nice, backing track is really nice, and I love it how there's this Smile-esque complete 180 at the end. The song kind of ends, but then we got that count in, and then we get this groovy, bluesy, rocking thing with Carl and Brian singing that amazing phrase at the end. And I wish that would go on for like 3 or 4 minutes, because it's just so groovy. But a soothing song, very beautiful song, and I really like it. Album ends off with Love Is a Woman, which, well, a lot of people say that Airplane would have been a better album closer, and I kind of agree, but I still think that Love Is a Woman is a good song too. It's a sort of loungy, sort of bar rocker. It's got a really interesting mood. It's something that Brian never really did with any other song. The lyrics are a bit cheesy, but it's alright. Like, I think the subject matter is alright. It's about just, a guy that really likes women, like Dr. Love, Sounds like something Dr. Love would write, but, Anyway, just a fun tune. It's not so deep and nothing offensive, really. Nice vocals, and the melody is nice, and just not so strong. Airplane is a stronger track, so maybe it would have been a better closer, but this is a very traditional Brian Wilson thing. He always liked to end his albums with some sort of goofy, weird thing, and it's, you get that really cool jam first with Airplane, and it fades out, and then you get a little bit of silence, and then you think that the album is maybe over, but then you hear that love, that part, and it's like, what? Wakes you up, and you're like, okay. You just gotta kind of laugh about that, because it's kind of hilarious. But anyway, I like it, always liked it. Nothing too deep, but it's a fun tune. So anyway, that's it. The Beach Boys Love You. Very soothing, really nice record. Bittersweet, it's got some melancholy too, but mostly it's a very easy listen in my opinion, because the melodies are so strong, catchy, and it's got a lot of rockers too, so compared to Pet Sounds, for example, I find this one a lot more easier to digest, and it's very interesting, because it truly did affect the sort of the evolution of synth-based music, at least within musicians, even though the general audiences do not know this album, it's very important actually. And these days a lot of indie bands really love this one, and younger people like me truly love this one. For a lot of people, this is their favorite Beach Boys album. Many people don't like it at all, but still a lot of people actually do love it. Thanks for watching. See you soon again on the next video. Take care. What do you think about the album? Write it down in the comment section. Take care. Bye bye.